Ozone is an unstable, pale bluish gas formed when oxygen is subjected to an electrical discharge, such as in lightning storms. A layer of ozone, which is the molecule O3, in the stratosphere, 10 to 15 kilometers above the Earth, serves as a barrier to protect the Earth from harmful radiation, especially ultraviolet rays. A 5% depletion in the whole ozone layer at temperate latitudes will cause an average rise of 10% in the ultraviolet radiation intensity at ground level. This can result in a variety of problems, such as eye cataracts, skin cancers, and reduced immune function. Humans, of course, aren't the only things to be affected. UV rays can also kill small fish and plankton near the ocean's surface, and the harvest volume of some agricultural crops is apparently reduced in inverse proportions to rising UV levels. Soybeans, for an example, are especially vulnerable. Okay, back to our Revelation scenario. Could a nuclear war damage the ozone layer? Maybe. Scientists tell us that a large number of multi-megaton warheads exploded in the atmosphere could conceivably deplete the ozone layer by as much as 30 to 40%. Now, the ozone layer is constantly being regenerated, so it could theoretically recover to nearly normal density and thickness within 2 or 3 years, given the normal amount of thunderstorm activity. The trend among the major atomic powers, however, has been to stockpile larger numbers of smaller devices, and these smaller kiloton-range bombs may not be capable of launching the requisite harmful nitrogen oxide materials high enough to damage the ozone layer. It's all theoretical, you understand. Nobody's doing atmospheric nuclear weapons testing these days. The real Achilles heel of the ozone layer seems to be chlorine. It is believed that one chlorine atom, through a series of reactions, can lead to the destruction of tens of thousands of ozone molecules. Chlorofluorocarbons, chemically stable compounds that can hold together for years after being discharged into the atmosphere, have been the biggest ozone layer destroyers in recent decades. Being lighter than air, they rise to the stratosphere, where strong ultraviolet rays eventually break them down, releasing their chlorine atoms. These in turn strip oxygen atoms from the unstable O3 molecules, leaving the more stable O2, an allotrope of oxygen far less efficient in protecting the Earth from UV rays. Hence the problem. So here's the question. Does the prophetic record suggest a scenario in which massive amounts of chlorine compounds could be released into the atmosphere? We have to read between the lines, of course, but I'd say that the numerous references to brimstone suggest a widespread use of chemical weapons. Although brimstone is technically sulfur, it could easily be a metaphor for a whole range of noxious substances brought into play during the last days. And since the First World War, chlorine has been one of the elements most likely to show up in chemical weapons. That still doesn't prove that the widespread use of chlorine-based chemical weapons could destroy the ozone layer, though. The fact is, it takes industrial chlorofluorocarbons 7 years or more to float high enough to do any damage. No one knows if chemical weapons released into the atmosphere can remain intact long enough to reach the stratosphere. For that matter, chlorine gas by itself is heavier than air. It crawls along the ground, neutralizing infantry troops with great alacrity, as they found out during World War I. So it's possible we're on the wrong track with the man destroying the ozone layer line of inquiry. Let's look again at the passage in question.
The fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and power was given to him to scorch men with fire, and men were scorched with great heat.
I have been operating under the assumption that the effect was the key. Men were scorched. But the verse plainly says the angel poured out his bowl onto the sun. Perhaps the sun itself is the source of the increased heat on the Earth's surfaces. We've all heard of solar flares, the sudden intense variations in the sun's brightness that can affect our weather patterns and communications. These hour-long events occur when magnetic energy that has built up within the solar atmosphere is suddenly released, like rubber bands pulled too tightly and recoiling with explosive results. Physicists call this effect magnetic reconnection. When this happens, radiation is emitted across virtually the entire electromagnetic spectrum, from radio waves at the long wavelength end through visible light to X-rays and gamma rays at the short end. The amount of energy released is equivalent to millions of 100-megaton hydrogen bombs exploding at the same time, which, to put it in perspective, is still less than 1/10 of the total energy normally emitted by the sun in any given second. Scientists have determined that solar flares occur near sunspots, usually along the dividing lines between areas of oppositely directed magnetic fields. By constantly measuring magnetic shear in and around sunspots, they have learned how to predict large solar flares. The biggest of these events are called X-class flares. Our atmosphere, including the ozone layer, is ordinarily quite effective in defending the Earth against their effects. Thank you, Yahweh. As far as the scientists can tell, there has never been a flare intense enough to cause the kind of heat spoken of in the fourth bowl judgment of Revelation. Not on the sun, anyway. Distant stars are another matter. Super flares have been observed for years emanating from young stars, fast-rotating stars, or twin stars, places where the magnetic fields are presumed to be totally haywire. But in 1999, a team of Yale University researchers announced that they had observed super flares anywhere from 100 to 10 million times as powerful as ordinary X-class solar flares, coming from 9 stars described by astronomer Bradley E. Schaefer as, quote, disturbingly similar to our own sun. He was quick to point out, of course, that we are in no immediate danger, saying, our sun does not do this as far as we can tell. These superflares are theoretically triggered by interaction between the star's magnetic fields and those of nearby gas giant planets like Saturn or Jupiter, which in the case of our solar system are far too distant from the sun to have the requisite magnetic influence. Schaefer, however, did speculate on what would happen if such a superflare were to occur here. A powerful one could create, quote, a complete global ozone hole that would last a couple of years, unquote. And we know what that would do, don't we? Such a superflare, he said, could turn a cold winter day into a hot summer day. Does this sound familiar to anybody but me? It's a perfect description of the effects of the fourth bowl judgment. It would take a miracle, of course, for the magnetic forces on the sun's surface to build in just the right way and let go at just the right moment to cause such a phenomenon. I've got no problem with that. To my mind, the far greater miracle would be the sort of thing Yahweh did 10,000 times over when He created this earth for us to live on, achieving perfect balance. The superflare would have to be strong enough to get men's attention. An ordinary X-class flare wouldn't even be noticed after a nuclear war. But weak enough to avoid turning the planet Earth into a charcoal briquette. God's not done with the world yet. People are still going to have to live here after bowl number 4. Belief here is a package deal. Either Yahweh is the creator of the whole universe and thus capable of controlling such things, or He isn't. The 5th bowl game looks a lot like the 4th quarter of a scrimmage played out 2,500 years previously in Egypt. And even with the home field advantage, the Antichrist's team remains scoreless.
Then the 5th angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and his kingdom became full of darkness. And they gnawed their tongues because of the pain. They blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and of their sores. And they did not repent of their deeds. Revelation 16:10-11.
This is the 5th time we've seen specific moves from Moses' playbook used against the Antichrist and his followers. We saw how water was turned into blood. This was the first plague upon Egypt. We've seen boils or sores, the sixth plague, hail, number 7, and locusts, the 8th plague, though those in Revelation were clearly demonic. We're also going to meet some demonic frogs shortly. Considering the unsanitary conditions that will prevail following World War III, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to find flies and lice tormenting the inhabitants of the earth, though these things aren't specifically mentioned in reference to the last days. Darkness was the 9th and most terrifying of the Egyptian afflictions. The only thing left after that was the death of their firstborn sons. Can you spell Armageddon? Darkness meant something special to the Egyptians of Moses' day, and it ought to mean the same thing to the Antichrist's people. Since the time of Tammuz, Satan has been trying to pass himself off on the human race as Lucifer, son of the morning, as he's called in Isaiah 14, the sun god, the source of all life. The Egyptian permutation of this lie was named Ra. Thus, when darkness fell over the land of Egypt, it was an unmistakable sign to them that their revered solar deity, the head of their pantheon, had been defeated by the Hebrew god Yahweh. Fast forward to the 21st century, Lucifer is still trying to get us to believe that he's the great illuminator, the light giver. So God instructs the angel with the 5th bowl to demonstrate what Satan is really all about: darkness and pain. This black sky doesn't happen over the entire earth, but is specifically said to be within the Antichrist kingdom and upon his throne. It could be argued that his kingdom is Europe, since that's where he originally rose to power. But as we have seen, the Antichrist will set up his world headquarters in Israel.
He will plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious set-apart mountain. Daniel 11:45.
So which is it, Europe or Israel? The prophet Joel provides the answer.
Blow the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my set-apart mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh is coming, for it is at hand, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, like the morning clouds spread over the mountains. Joel 2:1-2.
The prophet has not only pinpointed the location of the darkness, but identified its cause: thick, heavy clouds, so black that you'd swear the sun was going down.
And it shall come to pass in that day, says Almighty Yahweh, that I will make the sun go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in broad daylight. Amos 8:9.